You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynn Mozart. The World at 8, the number one in nationalist news.
Highlights of the news today, Friday the 6th of September 2013. Sex beast carved his name into girls' arms. Asian hornets head for Britain. Abortion laws left meaningless as doctors put above the law. Sweden grants blanket asylum to Syrian refugees. Italy, suicides rose 12% at the height of the recession. Plantivan terrorism leads to lost Dutch nationality. Nick Griffin MEP, who today talks about Syria, Dawn and Clive and the peanut debacle. Underwater volcano is Earth's biggest. France and the US keen to mute EU critics on Syria. Armenia, EU, Moscow makes Yerevan an offer it can't refuse. Thought for the day, do we really care as a people? And finally, man made to wear idiot sign in Ohio. UK news. Sex beast carved his name into girls' arms. An Oldham man who carved his nickname onto the arms of two young girls and sexually assaulted a third has been jailed. Dildhar Miah, 21, of Yasmin Gardens, West Hume, was sentenced to 6 years imprisonment at Minshall Street Crown Court, Manchester, this week after admitting assaulting the two 14-year-olds and sexual activity with a child. The assaults took place near Boundary Park in August last year, where Miah carved part of his nickname onto the arms of the two girls with a piece of glass. He was also charged with an offence of child abduction after a 14-year-old girl was found at his home address in November that year. He had previously been issued with a child abduction notice stating that he was not allowed to communicate with her or allow her to stay at his home. Following further disclosures by the third victim some weeks later, Miah was charged with 3 offences of committing sexual activity with a child between August and November 2012, as well as child abduction with intent to commit a sexual offence. He pleaded guilty to all the charges. Charlotte Rimmer, District Crown Prosecutor for CPS North West, said Dildhar Miah targeted his young, vulnerable victims and sought to use his influence as an older male to exploit them. Carving his nickname into the arms of the two girls while they were intoxicated was just one way in which he tried to exercise his control over them. World at 8 states. So this Muslim bastard has only got 6 years and will be out in 3. He raped children and at the moment we have our prisons getting fuller by the day with foreign rapists and abductors, most of which are of the faith of Islam, and they should be deported with their families. This is the only deterrent that will soon be open to us, as not only are we getting full in this country, but our prisons are full to busting, even allowing for a new multi-million all-mod cons prison to house these so-called men. Send them back, judges, send them back. Asian hornets head for Britain. Public warns swarms which deliver vicious sting are coming across the channel. Swarms of vicious Asian hornets are heading across the channel to Britain, the public has been warned. The Department for the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs said it feared the species had already, or was about to, spread to Britain during its peak season of September. DEFRA said the Asian hornet, Latin name Vespa velutini nigrithorax, was invasive and predatory and attacked honeybee colonies. A statement said it has spread very quickly to many areas of France, where it is reported to be causing many problems for both beekeepers and biodiversity in the country. The hornet can prey on bee colonies, causing significant harm. World at 8 states. Not the only nasty thing to come out of Asia. Abortion laws left meaningless as doctors put above the law. Britain's legislation on abortion has become meaningless, MPs warned tonight, as the country's most senior prosecutor was accused of putting above the law doctors who agreed to arrange illegal terminations. Lord MacDonald, the former Director of Public Prosecutions, described as very dubious the decision, overseen by his successor Keir Starmer QC, not to charge 2 doctors who agreed to arrange abortions of baby girls purely because of their gender. Britain's biggest abortion provider declared that the decision showed that terminating babies because of their gender is not necessarily a crime. The Crown Prosecution Service has told 2 doctors who were exposed by an undercover Daily Telegraph investigation last year that they will not be charged even though there was enough evidence, because it did not consider the issue to be in the public interest. The CPS said the key reason for the decision was that the doctors would still be investigated by the General Medical Council. But Lord MacDonald said this amounted to letting them avoid criminal action because of their professional status, undermining the basic principle that everyone is equal under the law. The British Pregnancy Advisory Service, which carries out 55,000 terminations a year, went as far as to insist that sex selection abortions are not illegal. World Date comments. What would be interesting would be the public naming and shaming of the 2 doctors involved. Maybe they are of the same religious persuasion as the bulk of the CPS. If so, then they are merely carrying out the same medical practices as in their own countries, where to abort a normal, healthy female fetus is considered okay. It isn't okay in my country, even by an ethnic minority. I'm sick and tired of England turning into Pakistan or Saudi by virtue of deeds done with no punishment. European news. Sweden grants blanket asylum to Syrian refugees. Sweden on Tuesday became the first European Union country to announce it will give asylum to all Syrian refugees who apply. All Syrian asylum seekers who apply for asylum in Sweden will get it, Annie Hornblad, the spokesperson for Sweden's migration agency, told AFP. The agency made this decision now because it believes the violence in Syria will not end in the near future. The decision, which will give refugees permanent residence status, is valid until further notice, added Hornblad. Until now, Sweden could only house refugees temporarily for 3 years after each individual case was evaluated by the state. The agency expects that the vast majority of Syrian nationals who today have provisional status will apply for permanent status, said Hornblad. Those granted permanent status will also be allowed to bring their families to Sweden. World at 8 states. Is Hornblad mad, bad or premenstrual? I hope she isn't expecting all of Europe to follow suit. Has she really thought this through? All Sweden will be getting are the families of the rebel jihadists who will radicalise their fellows. God help Sweden. Italy, suicides rose 12% at height of the recession. The number of people aged 25 to 64 who committed suicide climbed 12% in 2009 to 2011 during Italy's worst post-war recession, according to data to be mulled at a meeting in Rome next week. Maurizio Pompili, head of the Suicide Prevention Service at Rome's Sant'Andrea Hospital, described the situation as dramatic. The economic crisis-related suicide statistics represent a considerable increase, Pompili told Andronikos. There are around 3,900 suicides a year in Italy, he said. The most vulnerable people right now seem to be those of working age, Pompili noted. The Sant'Andrea Hospital Suicide Helpline and Centre assists some 800 to 1,000 people each year, he said, adding suicides can be prevented. Italy's economy is forecast to contract 1.8% this year, the OECD said on Tuesday, although its chief economist Carlo Pedone said it now appears to be at a turning point. Italy is the only one among the G7, the world's 7 most industrialised economies, to contract this year, according to the Paris-based OECD. Plan Teven, terrorism leads to loss of Dutch nationality. State Secretary Fred Teven, Security and Justice, wants to bring a new bill to automatically strip Dutch citizenship from members of terrorist organisations. At this time, Dutch citizenship can only be taken if someone voluntarily joins the army of a state that is engaged in hostilities against the Kingdom of the Netherlands or against an alliance of which the Kingdom is a member, such as NATO. Teven sees changing social perceptions of terrorists or paramilitary and guerrilla groups enough reason to tighten the current system. However, a final criminal conviction is a prerequisite because high demands are necessary before citizenship can be lost. The new measures, however, may not result in the offender being stateless. The removal of Dutch nationality can only occur if someone also has another nationality. Belly of the Beast. I now hand you over to Nick Griffin MEP, who today talks about Syria and Dawn and Clive and the Peanut Gallery.
So it's been a really busy week, I've got to tell you about now. No sooner really back from the end of a very, very tricky journey back from Syria, more on all that in due course, as I had to head up to Workington on Wednesday, where Clive Jefferson and Donald Charlton, as I assume you know, certainly hope you do, were in court over allegations that some Poles had been greatly upset by our local election leaflet up there, which pointed out that the Labour Party had used some Poles to hand out election leaflets. They didn't even know where the right area was, so they'd got it wrong. They put them out on the wrong day. So, as we said, if you pay peanuts, you get monkeys. Well, the Labour Party has organised a whole bunch of Labour Party supporters to say that this was a terrible thing, and also they dragged some Poles into Carlisle to say they'd been mortally offended and they never heard anything worse, and that we're calling the Poles monkeys, which of course we are not. We have, as you know, members in the party of Polish descent. We have very good relationships with various Polish nationalists. We've got a great deal of time for Poles, but we don't think there should be hundreds of thousands of them over here taking our people's jobs. But Poles are most definitely not monkeys. They're as European as thee and me. Anyway, I was up in Workington at that, partly to give support to Clive and Dawn, but also to discuss with the solicitor, and he did indeed point it out to the Crown Prosecution Service and the judge that really they've got the wrong people there, because I wrote that leaflet, I organised its production, and I organised its distribution. So if they want to come for anyone over that leaflet, then, well, they know where I am. There was a fascinating legal argument, actually, in the brief hearing as to whether the Crown Prosecution Service have even brought anything like a sustainable the right charge. Question is whether that particular section of the Public Order Act, which has to be about behaviour which is in a public place, applies once a leaflet has been put through someone's door and is in the privacy of their own home. That bang, if you heard that, by the way, was an acorn falling on top of the car. And the simple answer, according to the case law, is no, they can't do it. They picked the wrong law, but we'll see what happens. Perhaps they'll come back and come back with something else. We don't know. But that one is going to run and run. Having been there, I had to dash down to Manchester Airport and get over to Brussels, partly to get my car out of the airport, because we left it there last week when heading to Syria. It's very easy to get your car out of a long-stay car park, unless the car parking ticket is in someone else's wallet in Cumbria. And as Mr. Jefferson had taken the car parking ticket and he still had it, I had a bit of a struggle to get the car out. But the good news is that as long as you've got some kind of identity, which of course being in an airport you have, with your passport and the vehicle document in the car, and your flight ticket stubs or something similar to show you really had flown out of there, you can get your car back. So that's something I learnt, and which may one day be useful to you. I hope it is. It is easier, though, just to keep the damn ticket in the first place. Also there, in a short week, therefore, in Brussels this week, we had a meeting of the Alliance of European National Movements, and partway through it, one of our assistants came through with an email which had just arrived, hot off the press, from Ernst & Young, the international audit company, who are the independent auditors appointed by the European Union to oversee the accounts and do the audits for all these European level political parties, of which of course we are merely one. And the answer that Ernst & Young, the auditors, gave is an absolute clean bill of health, a fair and full set of accounts, etc., etc. Very, very good. Clive Jefferson helped a bit with that, with some advice early on, which of course is experience he's got from getting the British National Party's accounts in order, so that we also now get 100% endorsement from our auditors. It's a piece of bureaucracy I wouldn't want to do. In fact, to tell you the truth, I couldn't possibly do it. So fair play to those who did. I think the left will be deeply upset. They hoped, when they couldn't stop us getting the alliance formed and funded, they hoped we'd trip up over the technicalities, and they've been proven wrong. So that's a piece of good news for everyone. I was also obviously there looking at what's going on next week in the plenary session, and Baroness Ashton, the nearest the EU has to a foreign minister, is going to be addressing some waffling on why the EU should support the appalling proposed American attack on Iraq. I said Iraq, that was last time, wasn't it? No, this time, of course, it's Syria. Next time it'll be Iran. The time after that, Russia, if they aren't stopped. So I'm doing my best to try and stop them at this point of Syria before it goes any further. So I put my name down to speak there, and I hope to get an opportunity to ask some awkward questions and make some difficult points for Baroness Ashtown. In the meantime, on the question of Syria, I do hope that you'll read the article on our website today, Why Syria Matters to You. It really is an important article. I won't go over the points again because I hope that you'll read them and I hope you'll distribute the article. If you do nothing else for the rest of the year in British national politics, and of course I hope you do, but if you do nothing else, then please, 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 over the next 48 hours, starting right now, get on the mainstream media, get on the comment sections of newspapers, of TV news programs and so on, and use some of the facts, some of the points in that article, get them across to people. In particular, don't bother so much about the British media, try and get on the American newspapers and comment there, because that's where the struggle is now, to keep the West from interfering in a quarrel that has nothing to do with us. There's a huge groundswell of instinctive opposition to this nonsense, but it needs solidifying. To be solidified, it needs facts. That's what I've given you in that article. I do hope, as I say, that you'll get out and use them. Post links to Islamist atrocities. Post links to English language reports from RT and other Russian TV channels, because they're the only source of free and fair news and views in the mainstream media in the world today. 3 points in particular you need to get across. One is the sheer irony, the horror, that as we approach the anniversary of 9/11, Obama and the other warmongers in the USA are on the verge of turning the United States Air Force into the Al-Qaeda Air Force. That's the first point. The second one, obviously, as you probably know, the Americans have a huge, huge streak of Christianity still in them. They take it very, very seriously. So point out that the Syrians, everywhere that these so-called moderate rebels have taken over, Syrian Christians have been massacred, whole village loads of them. Just in the news today, they're talking about how one of the last villages in the world that speaks Aramaic, which is literally the mother tongue of Jesus Christ, has been overrun by Al-Qaeda sympathisers, that Christian businessmen and villagers have simply disappeared. There have been efforts already to forcibly convert them. A statue of Mary in the town square has been smashed. It starts there. The Christians of Syria their community will be utterly destroyed if the United States helps the rebels to win. It's as simple as that. Syria is the last place in the Middle East where Christians are still free and fairly treated and free to practice their religion, our religion, and if secular Syria falls, there will be nowhere. That's the second point. The third point is to get across the fact that when Obama and the others say, oh, don't worry, there's no chance of having boots on the ground, it's inevitable there were boots on the ground. With a 60-day campaign, which is what they're talking about, that is aimed at regime change, or at least the destruction of the Syrian government under President Assad, and its replacement by a war-torn shambles of Islamist warlords. And if that happens, they will, of course, gain control of the arsenal of the Syrian government, the government forces, which means that they will come into possession, I think it's pretty clear, of chemical weapons, because although Assad has said he didn't use them, and I think we can take that to be true, because certainly it's not in the interests of the Syrian government to cross a very clear red line, but whether they were used or not, there'll be plenty left. They will fall into the hands of Al-Qaeda. They will be used against us on the streets, on the underground of London, of New York, of Moscow, anywhere in the world, and therefore Britain and America will have to send in special forces troops at least to try and secure those arsenals. So our boys and girls will end up fighting and dying on the streets of Damascus and various dusty villages in parts of Syria that have got nothing to do with us if the Americans go ahead with their attack. Those are the points you need to get across. The Al-Qaeda Air Force, the persecution of Christians, and the fact that they'll have to send troops in to get the weapons off the Islamist rebels who will otherwise use them against us. Those are the points to get across. Please get out there and do it, because that vote in the American Congress could well be on a knife edge, and just one little bit more push from public opinion to one or two more senators, one or two more congressmen could make all the difference. If you do nothing else this year for the cause, give that a go. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. I am pleased to say that some of the UK papers gave a very fair write-up of your trip to Syria, which was very impressive as you were the only MEP to go out there at that time. World news. Underwater volcano is Earth's biggest. Tamu Massive rivals the size of Olympus Mons on Mars. Geophysicists have discovered what they say is the largest single volcano on Earth, a 650-kilometre wide beast the size of the British Isles, lurking beneath the waters of the northwest Pacific Ocean. The megavolcano has been inactive for some 140 million years, but its very existence will help geophysicists to set limits on how much magma can be stored in Earth's crust and pour out onto the surface. It also shows that Earth can produce volcanoes on par with Olympus Mons on Mars, which at 625 kilometres across was until now the biggest volcano known in the solar system. France and the US keen to mute EU critics on Syria. The US, France, Germany and the UK will try to mute EU critics of Syria intervention at the Foreign Ministers' meeting in Vilnius on Friday, 6th of September and Saturday. The EU event comes after pro-intervention countries faced hostility from Russia and China at a G20 summit in St. Petersburg on Thursday. French leader François Hollande said in Russia it's really important that the Europeans here at the G20 are on the same page, in calling for a St. Petersburg statement that blames Syrian leader Bashar al-Assad for a chemical weapons attack on the 21st of August. British PM David Cameron said he has new forensic evidence that sarin gas was used. But Italian leader Enrico Letta noted that Italy will not take part in action without a UN mandate. He also tweeted after a G20 dinner that the evening session confirmed the divisions on Syria. The anti-Assad military coalition contains Australia, France, Turkey and the US. The Vilnius agenda also includes the Eastern Partnership, an EU policy on building closer ties with former Soviet nations. Russia has recently put pressure on Armenia, Moldova and Ukraine not to conclude EU political association and free trade pacts at a summit with EU leaders in November. World Today comments. Perhaps these guys will come up with the $100,000 answer. OK, sarin gas was used, but by whom? That is the question if there is one. Frankly, I don't care. Armenia, EU, Moscow makes Yerevan an offer it can't refuse. Armenia chooses Russia over EU, headlines the European Voice, after the news Yerevan will join Russia's trade body, the Eurasian Customs Union, instead of signing the free trade deal it spent several months negotiating with the European Union. The surprise decision follows a Russian request for a meeting between Armenia's President Sergei Sargsyan and Russian President Vladimir Putin on August the 30th in Moscow. The EU forbids countries from being members of both its Deep and Comprehensive Free Trade Agreement, DCFTA, and the Customs Union. Thought for the day, do we, as a people, really care? We were up at Terminal 5 in Heathrow Airport today, collecting my American stepdaughter, and I had several thoughts. Firstly, what a lovely building it is, and how the car parking is so very well organised. Secondly, we have virtually lost this airport to the third world. And thirdly, why should we build yet another expensive air terminal just to ferry or collect more third worlders who are either coming in permanently to the benefit haven of the UK or swanning around with their relatives to second and third homes in Asia or Africa? Because apart from a few white Europeans, it was rather like being in Lahore, Calcutta or Nigeria. We have in effect lost our hold on our own internal workings, my friends, and as Putin has intimated, we have become a shadow of our former selves, mainly because we have never valued our country or our people the way we should have, and yes, we have allowed a form of genocide against our own people under the clever guise of helping people from other lands and at the same time providing cheap labour. At this moment in time we were all falling for this propaganda. We were all ignoring the price of being a small island which had never really been invaded openly in any sense of the real word invasion, and that was of a future which totally relied on the acceptance of losing our culture, money, pride and self-sufficiency, and not only that but paying through the nose for the pleasure of doing so. Only nationalism saw the light, and that light was deliberately put out by the governments and media. My point being, will the great British public ever really know what's going on, and will they ever really care? Who but the British National Party thinks about the future? We may be toxic in the eyes of the media, but who else will carry the can for the problems that massive immigration has and will bring? What other group of people, even some of the very good people that we have lost, do if we cease to exist? Nationalism is on the rise in Europe, and there's a very good reason why this is so. For the main part, we Brits don't want to think or dwell on what's happening to our country. The good old working class revolution is dead, or rather it's been morphed into the lower end of the middle class box as the poor man's thinking club or the sheeples, and much like the old rule for dinner parties in the 30s, don't discuss religion or politics at the table, it's become don't even think about them now. The people at the bottom of our garden had a party last weekend, and being outside at the time I had a good listen. The couple who own the house are retired and play golf, and their guests were all middle-aged, or a bit past middle-age that is. There must have been around 6 couples, and at no time in their conversations, bearing in mind these were educated people, did the subject of the world situation, the UK stance on Syria, or anything pertaining to politics come up. I was shocked because in the good old days, before political correctness and the Big Brother ideology, when in polite society or with friends, we always talked about the present political situations and more. But these people clearly didn't want to know, and they're not alone. My worry for this country is that ever the establishment find a reason to do away with the British National Party and the various self-styled nationalist splinter groups popping up all the time, what will happen to these self-same people at the end of our garden who apparently don't think about the condition their country or their homes will be in when Sharia law comes to stay? It isn't rocket science or scaremongering to actually put one's grey matter into looking beyond what is written or spoken of in the papers and on the television and see what is happening in your own hometown. It's there for us all to see, but then one has to actually care, and this is what is missing from our population, or rather the bulk of it. They don't really care, unlike most of our European friends. Why are we different? Well, it is a national characteristic not to care or worry about something unless it directly affects you and your family, but then we have had many situations in various areas of this country that do affect us directly. The problem is that the media isolate these events and the police ignore them, so in a sense they go away. So all the Muslim sexual abuse, immigrants taking homes from our own tribes, overcrowding in schools wherein our children are forced out or left behind, and the growing problem of immigrants harassing existing white householders into moving home or areas are marginalised as non-existent. But we all know these things happen, and they're growing in numbers and violence. We have acted as a host country for over 40 years to the masses and the illiterates of the world, most of whom come to this country armed only with a bloody nerve and a host of relations to bring in or marry once ensconced in their social housing homes. Furthermore, if they progress to a ghetto where there are more of their kind, all the houses in the surrounding areas will be filled by their own kind within around 5 years. Thus were and are the cancerous growths of the ethnic communities about which our various governments and councils view as heaven on earth for these poor, hard done by people. If all the so-called committees, charities and community-aided ethnic-based businesses were shut down, the amount of money to flow back into the UK would be rather large, to say the least. We must be the only country in Europe to have a black police association and many more useless sacrifices on the altar of ethnic human rights, when we can barely feed our poor and elderly, and indeed blame our elderly for the state of the NHS, and not the thousands of ethnic users of that system, to say nothing of the ethnic workers within that system as well. No, this is nothing to worry about. Don't think about it and it'll all go away. Yeah? And when will this happen? Do you think the second coming will do away with immigration and Sharia? Bless him, but I don't think so. When it comes down to it, the only people that can help a country are the people who care about that country, not big business, not banks, not the majority of politicians, not governments nor any members of the judiciary, and certainly not the immigrants themselves, who have jumped on the only available bandwagon who will put up with them, that of the Great British bandwagon, not to be confused with slavery or colonialisation, of course. When it comes down to people of one religion helping others of the same religion, you can forget that as well, as history has shown, although rarely reported. Christians in this country don't care about the thousands of fellow Christians killed in Egypt or Africa by Muslims. They don't care about the hundreds of fellow white Christian farmers tortured and killed in Uganda and South Africa in the name of freedom or democracy. Do you see fellow peaceful Muslims offering parts of their country up to the Palestinians? No, and you won't, because the Arab League mucked up their chances of getting their homeland of Palestine after World War I and again after World War II. No other Arab or Muslim nation cares about the Palestinians. They are just a useful tool against the Israelis and the world. Most of the Muslim world simply don't care about Syria or the Middle East. They just want everyone to convert and take their country into Sharia law. And the number of lives it takes of their own doesn't matter to them, despite all the bleatings and wailings on the news. Africa isn't cared for by the Africans, whatever religions they may adhere to, or the various tribes involved. How can you say that a certain tribe of people who believe if you eat albino meat you'll be stronger are fit to govern themselves? Millions have died in Africa since the various countries within gained or were given their independence, and have the Africans cared? Not a jot. The very rich Zionist Jews got out of Europe well before the war and didn't, in many cases, give a flying F for the rest of the ones left. And contrary to what subsequent generations have been propagandised about, no one during the war knew what was going on in these camps, even the people that lived near them didn't. So all the fluffle about rescuing the Jewish people was a later thing, fresh out of Hollywood and the Jewish media moguls. No one, not even their own, cared. In fact, the huge Zionist bankers, the Rothschilds, took Nazi money along with many other Jewish and Christian peoples and businesses and were quite happy to do so. Just think of the truth of the American Civil War and then realise the truth is usually absent in the writing of history because of what is at stake: money and reputation and a new world order. It wasn't slavery that caused or fuelled that war, it was money and cotton. Before and during that war no one gave a monkey's whatsit about the slaves, not even Lincoln. What happens if a country's people don't care is either you get your country and its history railroaded to suit the political leanings of that time, or you get overrun and nothing can be done about reversing that process without harking back, in media terms of course, to the bad old days of National Socialism in Europe, and everyone knows that the Brits would rather convert to Islam and put up with being third-class citizens in their own country than actually do something about it. I will highlight a case which illustrates a point. If you can see it, you are a thinker. If not, you're obviously quite happy in your own little bubble. These are the bullet points. Shahidul Ahmed killed Rachel Manning 18 but evaded justice for 13 years. Miss Manning's boyfriend was wrongly convicted but freed on appeal in 2008. Ahmed disfigured Rachel's face with a car lock which had his DNA on it. In 2010 he was arrested for a sex attack and DNA tests linked him to murder. Judge at Luton Crown Court sentenced him to a minimum of 17 years in jail. Ahmed, 41, father of 5, was born in Bangladesh and lives in Bletchley, Buckinghamshire, was found guilty at the end of a retrial at Luton Crown Court yesterday. A jury failed to reach a verdict at his first trial in February, sentencing him to life imprisonment with the order that he serve a minimum of 17 years. Mr Justice Wilkie said, "For almost 10 years you've lived undetected with the knowledge of what you have done." Barry White served 6 years in prison. Mr White's conviction was quashed at the Court of Appeal in 2007 and he was acquitted at a retrial the following year. However, he has never received a penny in compensation for his last years. "I deserve a life back," he told the BBC. "Getting compensation and an apology from the police, that would be my justice." Now on the news they didn't say a life sentence would be passed, just 17 years, and of course with human rights and the fact this bastard is a Muslim, he will get out sooner. Also, being Muslim, had the situation been reversed, Ahmed would have got huge compensation from the petrified police. Poor Barry White got life and only thanks to DNA has he escaped doing a full life term. He should get compensation from Ahmed's family, and the one point you should have picked up is that he fathered 5 children for us to educate, feed and look after. At no time ever does deportation for the entire family come up as a punishment, which it should, and it should be mandatory. We have thousands of Muslims in our prisons, all being paid for by you. What happened to thousands of English boys, men, girls and women in the old days? That of deportation is obviously not considered suitable for our foreign criminals. Oh, come on now. I know we Brits don't care as a nation or a people, but enough is really enough. And both the people and the media might be praying for us nationalists to be able to help our own people and our own country. The time might yet come when we all stand together as a patriotic force for the good, and we'll have to forget our little differences, like being a neo-Nazi or a pro-Zionist or an anti-whatever and pro-Aryan nation or anti-EDL, and simply be a nationalist and a caring patriot. Because if we don't care enough for our country to forget our little foibles and egos, all will be lost. As this country doesn't have the benefit of a large thinking population. That has been taken out of their heads and substituted by a selfish and self-serving culture. And it will be down to us nationalists to try and put this country on the right road to economic and civil recovery and back into the world order. But for ourselves this time, just ourselves, this island will still be an island, and it will be our island. And finally, man wears idiot sign after threats to police. The public shaming was ordered by a judge in Ohio after the man drunkenly threatened police in 9/11 calls. A man who threatened to kill police officers in Cleveland has been ordered to wear a sign in public declaring him an idiot. Richard Dameron, 58, must stand outside a local police station with a yellow sign round his neck for 3 hours each day this week. The sign says, "I apologise to Officer Simone and all police officers for being an idiot, calling 9/11 threatening to kill you. I'm sorry and it will never happen again." His public shaming is not the first of its kind in the city. The Cleveland judge who sentenced Dameron previously made a woman wear an idiot sign in public for driving around a school bus. This presenter says, "We should do it over here. The one thing I notice is this guy is white. Would they do the same thing to a man of colour in Ohio? You can bet they might do it to a white English guy over here, but an ethnic? Never. It's all down in black and white." You've been listening to The World at 8. I am Lynn Mozart, and I and the team at World at 8 and Radio Britain wish you all a very happy and a very safe weekend. Here the species had already, or was about to, spread to Britain during its peak season of September. DEFRA said the Asian hornet, Latin name Vespa velutini nigrithorax, was invasive and predatory and attacked honeybee colonies. A statement said it has spread very quickly to many areas of France, where it is reported to be causing many problems for both beekeepers and biodiversity in the country. The hornet can prey on bee colonies, causing significant harm. World at 8 states, not the only nasty thing to come out of Asia. Abortion laws left meaningless as doctors put above the law. Britain's legislation on abortion has become meaningless, MPs warned tonight, as the country's most senior prosecutor was accused of putting above the law doctors who agreed to arrange illegal terminations. Lord MacDonald, the former Director of Public Prosecutions, described as very dubious the decision overseen by his successor, Keir Starmer QC, not to charge 2 doctors who agreed to arrange abortions of baby girls purely because of their gender. Britain's biggest abortion provider declared that the decision showed that terminating babies because of their gender is not necessarily a crime. The Crown Prosecution Service has told 2 doctors who were exposed by an undercover Daily Telegraph investigation last year that they will not be charged even though there was enough evidence, because it did not consider the issue to be in the public interest. The CPS said the key reason for the decision was that the doctors would still be investigated by the General Medical Council. But Lord MacDonald said this amounted to letting them avoid criminal action because of their professional status, undermining the basic principle that everyone is equal under the law. The British Pregnancy Advisory Service, which carries out 55,000 terminations a year, went as far as to insist that sex selection abortions are not illegal. World at 8 comments. What would be interesting would be the public naming and shaming of the 2 doctors involved. Maybe they are of the same religious persuasion as the bulk of the CPS. If so, then they are merely carrying out the same medical practices as in their own countries, where to abort a normal, healthy female fetus is considered okay. It isn't okay in my country, even by an ethnic minority. I'm sick and tired of England turning into Pakistan or Saudi by virtue of deeds done with no punishment. There as a people. And finally, man made to wear idiot sign in Ohio. UK news. Sex beast carved his name into girls' arms. An Oldham man who carved his nickname onto the arms of two young girls and sexually assaulted a third has been jailed. Dildhar Miah, 21, of Yasmin Gardens, West Hulme, was sentenced to 6 years imprisonment at Minshull Street Crown Court, Manchester, this week after admitting assaulting the two 14-year-olds and sexual activity with a child. The assaults took place near Boundary Park in August last year, where Miah carved part of his nickname onto the arms of the two girls with a piece of glass. He was also charged with an offence of child abduction after a 14-year-old girl was found at his home address in November that year. He had previously been issued with a child abduction notice stating that he was not allowed to communicate with her or allow her to stay at his home. Following further disclosures by the third victim some weeks later, Miah was charged with 3 offences of committing sexual activity with a child between August and November 2012, as well as child abduction with intent to commit a sexual offence. He pleaded guilty to all the charges. Charlotte Rimmer, District Crown Prosecutor for CPS North West, said Dildhar Miah targeted his young, vulnerable victims and sought to use his influence as an older male to exploit them. Carving his nickname into the arms of the two girls while they were intoxicated was just one way in which he tried to exercise his control over them. World at 8 states. So this Muslim bastard has only got 6 years and will be out in 3. He raped children, and at the moment we have our prisons getting fuller by the day with foreign rapists and abductors, most of which are of the faith of Islam, and they should be deported with their families. This is the only deterrent that will soon be open to us, as not only are we getting full in this country, but our prisons are full to busting, even allowing for a new multi-million all-mod cons prison to house these so-called men. Send them back, judges, send them back. Asian hornets head for Britain. Public warns swarms which deliver vicious sting are coming across the channel. Swarms of vicious Asian hornets are heading across the channel to Britain, the public has been warned. The Department for the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs said it
You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynn Mozart. The World at 8, the number 1 in nationalist news.
Highlights of the news today, Friday the 6th of September 2013. Sex beast carved his name into girls' arms. Asian hornets head for Britain. Abortion laws left meaningless as doctors put above the law. Sweden grants blanket asylum to Syrian refugees. Italy, suicides rose 12% at the height of the recession. Plantivan terrorism leads to lost Dutch nationality. Nick Griffin MEP, who today talks about Syria, Dawn and Clive and the peanut debacle. Underwater volcano is Earth's biggest. France and the US keen to mute EU critics on Syria. Armenia, EU, Moscow makes Yerevan an offer it can't refuse. Thought for the day, do we really care?